Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and welcome to this month's Leadership Development webinar focusing on the anatomy of an import, product journey, buying habits, and business challenges in 2021. My name is Jennifer Engel, and I'm Senior Vice President of National and Strategic Accounts on-premise at RNDC. I'm also on the advisory board for the Women's Leadership Council. Also moderating and participating today on the panel is my esteemed colleague and member of the Women's Leadership Advisory Board, Dina Opici, President of Opici Family Distributing. She'll be providing the distributor perspective in today's panel discussion. Today, we will venture into the life cycle of an imported product, from grape to glass. This program will reveal the often opaque journey an import goes through before it reaches port. We'll discuss how international supply chain disruptions have impacted the product journey and why today's market dynamics make a buyer's decision more challenging than ever before. Panelists will offer perspectives on best practices, data insights, and lessons learned in an uncertain year. Our goal is to knowledge share with the audience on how to reach predictable outcomes from an unpredictable channel. Before we go into our panelists, I would like to thank the Leadership Development Series Gold sponsors, JP Morgan and 365 Wine Trade. Additionally, we would like to thank our silver sponsors today, Wine and Spirits Shippers Association, Albatrans, and Mintel. Thank you for your generosity and for your participation today. As a reminder, this program will be recorded and will last an hour. I encourage everyone to submit questions in the Q&A box below, which we will try to answer toward the end of the session. Tomorrow, all webinar registrants will receive any follow-up materials, as well as the link to today's recording. With that, I'm extremely honored to introduce our panelists today. Sonia Davenport is Director of Consumer Insights and Marketing for RNDC. She's responsible for shaping and guiding long-term strategies, delivering best-in-class actionable insights to drive sales and marketing initiatives. Under Sonia's leadership, the Consumer Insights team plays a critical and influential role in helping RNDC understand current and future behaviors shaping the industry, while inspire consumer-centric thinking. She began her career in 1999 with Republic Beverage Company and has since held numerous leadership roles in operations, business development, and marketing. She received her undergraduate degree in marketing from the University of Incarnate Word and resides in San Antonio, Texas. Our next panelist, Allison Levitt, is Managing Director, Wine and Spirits Shippers Association. Taking over the leadership of the association in 2013, WSSA represents over 600 members involved in the import and export of alcoholic beverages and related products. The association manages over 35 contracts and a cargo insurance program that covers over $500 million in value in beverages shipped globally. Prior to joining WSSA, she served for 14 years as the Director of Business Development at Albatrans, a global freight forwarder headquartered in Florence, Italy, working on global accounts and strategic initiatives. Allison attended Bowdoin College, graduated magna cum laude, and studied at the London School of Economics, specializing in government and international relations. Our next panelist, Christina Mariani May, is the CEO and President of Banfi, a global wine brand that includes the internationally renowned Castello Banfi Vineyard Estate in Montalcino, Italy. Also, she leads the Banfi Vintners team and the U.S. Northwest Wine Pacific Rim and Company. The youngest daughter of Banfi Chairman Emeritus John F. Mariani Jr., Ms. Mariani May represents the third generation of family leadership in the company founded by her grandfather, John Mariani Sr. in 1919. Soon after completing her graduate studies in Georgetown University and Columbia University's Graduate School of Business, Mariani May joined Banfi in 1993. I'd like to welcome all of our panelists today, and just kind of a brief outline of our journey for the next hour. We're going to start really from a high-level perspective, and it makes the most sense to lay a foundation with data. So we will do just that. Then from there, Christina Mariani May is going to walk us through the journey of a bottle of Chianti Superiori, all the way from the winery to port. And then Allison will help us better understand how that wine goes from the port in Europe over to the United States, and how that port process has been impacted today, or that journey has been impacted today with all the supply chain challenges. And then Dina Opici is going to help us better understand from a distributor perspective, once that product reaches the port, how does it then make it all the way to the consumer at the end of the day? So as we kick off today, I again want to welcome our most esteemed panelists and experts in their field. Again, Sonia, I really want to start this discussion from a data perspective, because I feel that's critically important in terms of, understanding all the dynamics that we've been through over the past couple of years. Tariffs have come into play, supply chains have come into play, and ultimately help us better understand how that impacts at the end of the day a buyer's decisions. And of course, then, how the consumers end up having those products and enjoying those at our restaurants and retailers. Sonia?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jen, for kicking off the discussion today. I'm extremely excited to serve on the panel this afternoon to review some top line industry trends and market dynamics driven by consumer behavior and current system restraints. But what is driving consumer and shopper behavior? I think we could answer that question with a lengthy list of influencing factors, especially with so many polarizing effects from 2020. But today we're going to focus on just a few: availability, pricing, and overall operator recommendations. I'm sure we're all familiar. There's a saying in the wine industry, cold equals sold. But I think more importantly, available equals sold. Brands and products need to have both mental and physical visibility for the consumer to increase sales and have continued sales growth. Due to tariffs and logistic constraints, consumer buying behavior has definitely shifted. So we're going to go ahead and just dig into some data through some talking points. According to SipSource data, wine currently represents 54% of the market and spirits 46%. Looking at current trends, we can clearly see that spirits are growing over 5%, and wine has actually remained relatively flat and has actually trending down over the past 3 reporting periods. When we peel back the layers a little bit and look at imported versus domestic wines and focusing on the category specifically, we again see divergent patterns. Imports are growing over 3% versus last year, while domestic varietals are down 1%. Sparkling imports, not surprisingly, are up 7% due to consumers spending a lot more on champagne and Prosecco's. As we know, consumers throughout the last year really needed reasons to celebrate. And we too are consumers, so I certainly hope that we did some celebrating ourselves. Table wine continues to show similar trends. Imports are up nearly 2%, while domestic varietals are down. So nearly a 4% swing between the two categories. And over the course of the last 6 months, imports have led the way with continued growth. When we look at table wine overall, 77% of table wine sold is domestic currently. But if we go back in history and we look a little bit at archive data, in 2008, domestic wines were only 70% of the market. So we can clearly see the consumer shifted to domestic varieties over imports in the last 13 years. However, many interesting aspects happened throughout this last year. But something interesting I saw in a recent Nielsen presentation was during last year in 2020, wine.com reported more balanced sales of 52% imports and 48% domestic wine throughout the year of 2020. With the current trends that we see, along with continued adoption of online shopping and e-commerce space, it's clear to see that the consumer is purchasing more import wines. Research suggests collectors and consumers are searching out tariff-free top wines from Italy, including Super Tuscans, Barolos, Barbaresco, Brunello, and obviously from Champagne, as well as what I noted in our sparkling growth. According to the Fine Wine Report, demand for Champagne actually rose 14% in the US post-tariff from 10% before, while demand for Italian wines pushed its share up to 25% from 18%. When we think of wine programs within on-premise, specifically wines by the glass, if tariffs are imposed on Italian imports, an $8 to $9 glass will now cost consumers nearly double that. Not sure how many consumers are willing to pay $16 for a glass of wine that used to cost $8. They're likely going to switch to domestic or a more price advantageous offering to really get that value. A bottle of Prosecco could potentially go from $10 to $15 a bottle at retail. So why do we think consumers will trade and switch? Because history sighs and repeats itself. According to Mintel research, Scotch exports have actually decreased 30% since tariffs were imposed in 2019. Consumers clearly traded to more value-based products, but mainly to more premium American spirits such as bourbon. Still purchasing a premium price point, but consumers really want to feel they're getting a good value for their spend. And Mintel also reports, though it has decreased in importance over the last 7 years, price remains one of the top purchase factors when choosing wine at retail. It will be important for all of us to remind our operators of the potential self-fulfilling prophecy availability and pricing issues are causing and will cause with sales data and trends when we look at historical information. If only domestic brands are available to bring in for a promotion or display and imports lose due to inventory issues, we will need to remind our customers of these supply chain obstacles throughout the year. So much is unknown, yet we do know our consumers are currently drinking and have been buying import varieties prior, during, and post-COVID. We need to do the industry a favor and sell against this opportunity once the shipping and pricing challenges level out. Consumers seek variety, they always will. Imported wines fill this void and provide the diverse assortment necessary for category growth.
Well, Sonia, thank you so much for that high-level overview. And then, of course, really giving everybody some tips and tricks in terms of things to consider as we're talking to one another and, of course, our buyers in the industry. So talked a little bit about imports there and really the importance of keeping those top of mind as well. And Christina, obviously, you have a really fantastic vantage point because you have domestic properties and import properties. So today, to help us better understand from a distributor perspective, not everyone would necessarily know how, the journey that the bottle takes from your property, from the vineyard to your property, and then of course to port. So if you could help everybody better understand that today, I think that would be a good starting point.
Sure. So thank you, Sonia and Jen. So I'm going to transport us to Tuscany. It's great what Sonia was pointing out is that imported wines are still very strong and growing. I think one of the things we've seen this past year is that people wanted to escape. So sparkling wines or escaping from your kitchen and your screaming kids every single night and going to Tuscany, for example. So when we're going to Tuscany, we're going to be talking here as an example of a Chianti Superiori wine and what makes it unique and how it works its way to America. So one of the things that we're seeing, and Sonia was pointing out, is that some of these Italian wines, and if they be French or Spanish, they're very unique to the terroir and the area. So they aren't easily replaceable with another varietal, let's say like a Cabernet or Merlot from a domestic Californian winery. So they do have a sense of pedigree, a zonation to it, and a territory. And that's kind of what makes them unique. You escape with them, the consumer still wants to explore with them, and during this time, they want to travel. So they travel virtually by enjoying products that come from abroad. So that has really very much worked to the benefit. But let's follow that bottle of wine. So, the beauty of a lot of the European wines, according to the AOC and the DOCG laws, is that they are very highly regulated on how they grow and where they grow. So as we know, Chiantis can only be grown in Tuscany. So they're not really replaceable with other wines. They have a unique advantage in that they're not replaceable with domestic US wines in the sense that they cannot be called a Chianti. They can be called a Sangiovese, which is the predominant grape variety in Chianti, but they cannot replace a good old Italian classic Chianti. So what makes Chianti? Where does it start? Many people associate Chianti anywhere in Tuscany, but for those who are in the wine business know that it must come from a designated zone within the greater district of Tuscany. So just outside of Florence and surrounding Siena, my family at Banfi, we have a winery at the Red Dot, which is Montalcino, well known for the Brunello di Montalcino, which is 100% Sangiovese, but here we're doing Chiantis. So if you are a Chianti Superiori, The Chianti Greater Zone covers about 34,500 acres, and there's more than 3,500 estates located in this territory. So under those estates, also recall that many estates have multiple labels of Chianti. So we're talking about a lot of variety. But if we grow that same Sangiovese grape and bottled, blended with some other production of other types of wine, like let's say a Cabernet or Merlot blended in, and it's grown within the subzone inside on this chart, as you can see from the gold area, that's the Classico zone. So the Classico zone is within the greater zone of Chianti. And of course, the Classico zone is smaller. It's 17,800 acres. And it includes whole varieties and territories, and many, many different producers. So now we're going to get to the next slide, which is going to be what makes a Chianti Superiori. Well, you know, with the Italian laws, you might say that Superiori or Reserva is necessarily better in quality, not necessarily quantity. What we're seeing this year, and the topic of this conversation being supply issues, what we're seeing and the challenges is supply. Now, domestically, we see it with grape production, where fires are affecting us, and drought and water. In Italy, what we're seeing with supply, particularly in our red wines, is lack of water. Irrigation is a challenge in many wines, particularly in Brunello. You cannot irrigate by law after 3 years. Only the baby vines can be irrigated. So some of this grows very challenging, because if you have a good year, it's wonderful as far as quantity. But like, for example, this past year in Chianti, and this past spring, we actually had a terrible frost, which you've probably read about in Bordeaux. France had it, as well as Italy. So there's number one supply issue is Mother Nature. We love her. And as a women's panel, we respect her with all of our might, but she does not always work in our favor. So what we have to do is do a selection of different Chiantis. And hence, it's not just quality, but it's also designation where it's grown. So I want to bring up this slide because a lot of people get confused that one Chianti is a catch-all. There's different classifications here. So if you're in the greater Chianti region of Tuscany, you have a Chianti Annata. A Chianti Annata being just a yearly wine every year. There are classifications where it has to be 11 tons per hectare. Your minimum alcohol is 10.5%. That is pretty low for a red wine, especially when the heat is continued to get hotter and hotter in Italy and alcohol levels come up. You have a Chianti Superiori, which is the example we're using here today. So many consumers think, well, it has to be superior. Well, how it is superior is that it's lower tonnage, so you have to be very strict. It's 9.5 tons versus a regular Chianti, and the alcohol level has to be 11.5%. So it's one more percentage point in natural alcohol. And because of that, it's released later, where Chianti Annatas are released after the vintage. They're released the 1st of March. The Chianti Superioris are held longer until September. Chianti Reservas, then, if you want to say, has to be aged longer, and the alcohol level goes up to 12%. So the same thing goes in the Chianti Classico region. It's similar type of regulations. So what we're seeing now is we are having sometimes challenges in regulating which zone these grapes are going to come from and how they're going to be released. When they release from the winery, they go in batches, right? One of the challenges we see today is that we're having such huge demand for shipping of wines globally, especially Chianti, because it represents Italy and people are in love with Chiantis and they're doing very well around the world, is that we have to wait to the release date. We do not have the option of when we can release these wines. By law, they have to go at a minimum from our winery. The challenge is once we have those wines sent out, Allison will be addressing this more, but we're getting delays stuck when we send it from our winery in Italy on the truck to the ports within Italy. We send to Livorno, which is our closest port. We work with a shipper called Gori. But what we're having is there's a backlog at Gori's warehouse in Livorno. So we're shipping the goods there, but they are completely overwhelmed there. And Allison, again, you can talk to this, but they don't have the containers going out. So what our challenge is that we are having so many orders going around the world right now, being kind of like a panic buy, because people are saying, let's fill up our warehouses. We sell to 90 different countries out of our winery. So being an importer in the United States, one thing you must remember is when you're talking about European wines, you're also competing in a way with the other markets around the world and the demand. The US is one step ahead because of our COVID openness right now. But what we're seeing is, thanks to the internet, thanks to the global supply of love of Italian wines, there is a rush on orders. So we are up over 300%, almost 300, 400% in build and open orders from our winery. We cannot supply all the juice because Chianti can only have so much grape grown in it. And we can't just turn on a spigot. This is not alcohol. We cannot turn on a spigot and just make more wine. It's already been bottled, aged, and had to wait. So our problem now is a good problem to have, but not good. How do we fill those orders? And I'm going to kick it off for the sake of time now to Allison, because Allison's going to take our challenges and amplify them into greater detail. So Allison, I owe you a bottle of Chianti Superiori. Will you please bring it to the United States for me in a normalized amount of time and get it on my table tonight? How do you do that?
I get on a plane, I fly over and I pick it up and bring it to you. That's about the only way to move anything fast, but I'm happy to do that, really.
Thank you, Allison.
Anyway, well, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone at WSWA and the Women's Leadership Council. And it's just great to be on this panel with such a dynamic group of women who are so involved and passionate about this industry. And I think everyone who's in this industry tends to be pretty passionate about it. And it I think speaks to the nature of the product and what we're dealing with. So we have to get through this. And said, and thanks for the very nice introduction. At WSSA, we just threw this slide up to give you a little background. I think that shipping has flown below the radar for so many years because for so many years we've been in a place of overcapacity. And we talk about resilience in the supply chain, and resilience actually has been there because there has been more capacity, more supply than demand in terms of ship space and containers. We are absolutely flip-flop right now. So what WSWA does, and to give a little background, we actually were founded by WSWA and the National Association of Beverage Importers back in 1976. Now, the world has changed a lot since 1976, but you still need ships, you still need containers. There has been, no real upgrades in terms of moving import cargo around the world via cyberspace. It's got to be moved in cases, in containers via sea or air or intermodal truck, et cetera. So what the association was founded on the mission to negotiate competitive shipping rates based on using cooperative buying, the volume of our members. And so that is still our biggest priority. And I've kind of changed our tune now these days from freight negotiation and looking for prices as opposed to freight negotiation looking for space on ship. So that is the essential item in this particular time. It is not about paying the lowest price. It's about paying the price that will get you on a vessel and working with service providers that can, one, keep you informed as to where your product is and be able to obtain the equipment and space necessary. As was mentioned briefly in the intro, we also manage a massive risk management program, and that becomes incredibly essential during these times too. Christina talked about how they can't even get their wine into the warehouse, much less, get it to the port. What we're seeing right now with these incredible delays and congestion, you might deliver a container of wine into the port of Livorno, but the 3 vessels that are coming in while your containers there are overbooked. The steamship lines do not necessarily care that your container is full of wine that could cook in the heat, and containers are getting left behind both at the mother port, shall we say, as well as transshipment ports. So again, from Europe, a lot of the routes are direct, especially into the East Coast, But if you're coming out of Chile or Australia or New Zealand, you are going to be transshipping somewhere along the way, and you also risk leaving your cargo at that transshipment port. And so part of our risk management is covering the potential damage to the product while it might be sitting in a hot port and be cooked, or be frozen if someone sets a reefer container to a high temperature, whatever, those type of things. So we specialize in that risk management for beverage alcohol. And the third piece is really what I'm here for today, and we spend a heck of a lot of our time doing this: education, advocacy, intelligence. I have left our Toast Not Tariffs Coalition logo on these slides today because that has been such a big part of what we've been working on. The tariff issue has been mentioned a few times, and all of the different associations in this industry. And honestly, I think this industry is really lucky to have some amazing associations working on many different levels, but fighting the tariffs as a coalition has been very, very important, and I think effective. And well, we've done many presentations directly to Congress, to the USTR, getting our message out on the Hill that tariffs help nobody and hurt small industries, hurt large industries. So that's something that fortunately we are getting hopefully away from right now in a more normalized trade situation. So yeah, so WSWA has at this point over 700 members. We have grown enormously over the last couple of years, and the last year, the majority of our members came from tariff impacted locations, because it just shows you how important it is both for the suppliers and producers to understand the tariff and regulatory situation we're in here, as well as U.S. companies. We talked about, again, this life of an import, the anatomy of an import, and what your logistics provider should be doing for you, and whether you're RNDC or OPC or Banfi, almost all of the companies in beverage alcohol work with logistics providers. Wine and spirits and beer, they're still agricultural products. There's a lot of complexity. There's also a huge amount of regulation in the USA. So there has to be a middleman who is really coordinating these efforts. So most of you will hire a logistics company to move your cargo. And that logistics company gets involved right from the point of PO. And that purchase order should have things like your terms of sale and your requested ship date and all the details that you want your provider to know about your purchase order. And the logistics provider is also a buffer. They're going to review that PO. They're going to make sure the terms of sale match what they believe either the producer or the importer agreed to. They're going to look to make sure that it will comply with customs regulations. And they're also often going to be the party that really gets you the true readiness date. Again, right now, the situation is that suppliers are screaming that the logistics providers are not getting their product picked up. It's not just, say the Gory warehouse that's packed, it's the suppliers' warehouses. They want to move their product. These are many times small farms. They don't have huge warehouse spaces, and the logistics provider is saying, look, there's just no containers, or there's no bookings for 3 weeks. We don't want to load your container and then have it sit. So there's a ton of communication that is absolutely essential to the process. A lot of it is done via web portals and whatnot, but right now a heck of a lot of it is done via email, via phone, just communication on every little detail. So the logistics provider ultimately is the one that gets that container loaded, gets it booked with the steamship line, communicates all of those various regulatory pieces of data that honestly have been in place since 9/11, that there were so many regulations that went into place for security. So we talk in acronyms, whether ISF, Importer Security Filing, and AMS, Automated Manifest Transmission, and ISPS, International Port Security. We could speak a whole different language in the logistics world, but all of these items need to get taken care of to make sure your product gets on the ship, gets cleared through customs when it arrives, and smoothly goes through the supply chain. As said, nothing is really smooth right now because of the massive congestion. And I think the next slide just talks a little bit about some of the reasons, for the congestion. And as we said, the perfect storm. And so many different things have affected the industry. And I think in 2020, we would have said the biggest stress points were the tariff situation and the uncertainty of CBMA, Craft Beverage Modernization Act, and then, of course, when COVID hit. all of that almost seems in the rearview window right now, up in terms of what we're up against right now with basically what we would say a complete global meltdown in shipping and the bounce back of the economy. But nobody expected this incredible surge of import cargo starting from Asia as China reopened and started manufacturing again. And then basically this incredible buying binge that the US public has been on, and a surge that was just absolutely unprecedented. So this has impacted really everybody across the globe. And when you think about just the containers themselves, and hopefully none of yours have fallen off a ship the way this photo is, but container manufacturing is all done in China. That shut down when China locked down during COVID. So all of those orders that would have normally been placed for just the containers themselves were not placed. There's finally, empty containers that are being built and coming online. So there are some things that will ease this pressure, but as said, we're working at about 120% capacity. And so almost every area of the world has been affected at this point in terms of either lack of equipment or lack of space on vessels. The other thing that has happened that is just incredibly dramatic, more dramatic than in my 30 plus years in shipping, are the price increases. Again, this is something that I think Dina will talk about too, as the trickle down of the supply chain crisis is hitting across the board in terms of potential inflation and raising of prices. But a container from Italy to New York a year ago, maybe you were paying $1,700, just ballpark figure. If you can get that on a ship for under $4,000 right now, you're pretty lucky. The steamship lines from Europe to USA are getting upwards of $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 a container. It is like, our job in the logistics is like, booking a seat on an airplane. Right now, those seats are at auction and, going to the highest bidder. So we all in the logistics sector, we have these contracts, we have commitments from the steamship lines. Those carriers are not meeting their commitments. There's a lot of complaints being lodged with the Federal Maritime Commission, and in general, shipping public is reacting very strongly to these issues, but there's very little enforcement that the US government can do on this. This is just a lovely shot of a terminal in Los Angeles. This one isn't New York, but it gives you a sense of the overcrowding of terminals. These are just containers stacked on the terminal. It's impossible to maneuver in there. Your trucker goes in, they're trying to pick up your shipment that's cleared customs and it's ready. And they say, sorry, your container's in a closed area. We can't get to it today. Trucker has to leave, comes back the next day. Maybe he's waited 6 hours in line to get that answer. It is just impossible working environment. And it's I think the more education that we can provide on this, at least this can trickle down again to all the different parties. So when you tell your restaurant or your retailer or grocery store that we don't have this product, it's not because you have not done your due diligence, it's because the situation is out of control. So I think that's, gives you the picture of it. I don't think we need to get into some of these other issues in terms of where the tariffs hit. Right now, those tariffs are suspended. That's very, very promising information from Capitol Hill and the USTR that suspension will gain permanence. That is the best intel we're getting right now. So there's really no feeling that they will resume. Of course, that's not definite, but I think we can look forward to a much more steady and normalized trading environment when it comes to tariffs. I think I'll leave that there and move on to the next segment of this with Dina.
Thank you so much, Allison. I think that's a fantastic overview. And we'll circle back here in a few minutes and have some open dialogue as well. But so at this point, we have, we're hopeful we have the product on this side of the ocean. And from there, Dina, if you want to explain how that process ensues once it's reached port here in the United States.
Thanks, Jen. So I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to work with Jen, my fellow WLC Advisory Board member, on crafting today's agenda and sharing the screen with this fabulous group of women. So where do we fit as a wholesaler in the process? As a wholesaler, we sit in the middle of the three-tier system. We have to manage the challenges and the opportunities from both sides, the suppliers and the retail and restaurant marketplace. And it's fair to say that many days it feels like we're managing chaos, right? But since 2019, there's no question we have certainly had our fair share of challenges. And it started with imports, really with the imposition of tariffs. It shook the market and it had a real impact, especially on the on-premise segment, where the gatekeepers were forced to make changes in order to continue to provide affordable options for their customers. And then as we rounded into 2020, then came COVID. And we have had plenty of conversations on COVID and the pandemic and the impact on our businesses and our individual markets. So we're going to fast forward to 2021 and get beyond the pandemic, because the best news for imports coming into 2021 was that the tariffs had been suspended. And there was real light at the end of the tunnel, right? Vaccines had arrived, restaurants were reopening, marketplaces were reopening across the country, and we could look to get imports positioned again for success. And then we hit the perfect storm, and no pun intended, Allison, with regards to the ship going sideways, but demand was increased and supply was unavailable. And this shortage stemmed from several areas. First, we had continued international shutdowns throughout the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021 in Europe, which led to a lack of production. So part of the issue we're feeling right now is that we're still catching up, right, to production from the wineries and distilleries overseas. And then we had delays in shipment as a result of that lack of production. So whereas you used to put an order in and expect it to ship within 3 weeks, now production's taking, and then you're still waiting for it to ship. And then ultimately, as Allison explained, we have an overall slowdown in the transportation process due to a lack of equipment. But I will say that as a wholesaler, the difference between the challenges of 2019 with tariffs and the challenges now is that today's challenges aren't tangible, right? We knew what the tariffs were. We had notice of them, albeit short, but we reacted to them. We could make the changes we needed to in our own business environment to be able to ensure that we were capturing those costs, whether they were to us, to our suppliers, or to our customers, and ultimately the consumers. The current challenges present a surprise every day. And as Allison said, on any given day, different opportunities surface. We've gotten calls saying we have 10 vessels that are ready to leave with 10 spots on them if you can give us orders in the next 2 hours. You know, that's a very difficult way to manage your business. And it's not a welcome one because it's led by surcharges, it's led by out of stocks, and ultimately massive frustration within our own organization, with our customer base and our suppliers. And because of all this, we're seeing freight costs increase over 30% from last year. But again, on any given day, we're potentially guessing, right? The increases were 10%, then they were 20%. We're now at 30%. And I think the question is, where are they going to go? So what do we do as a wholesaler who's trying to start a new relationship or find success with a current relationship with an importer? At this point, we can only plan ahead. And I'm not saying to you that it's a pretty process, but we really need to reset our expectations right now. Goods that used to take 30 days to get to our warehouse are now taking 90, and that's domestically. Goods that used to take 60 days to get to our warehouse internationally are now taking 120 days. So we need to adjust our lead times, and we need to adjust our needs, and we really need to adjust our expectations, because what was no longer is. And we've been tested on this many days, many times, in many ways over the past year. But we really need to change our approach to how we start a new relationship with an importer or how we continue to plan for success with current partners. And we need to be responsible in our approach to pricing, because as you all know, who are in the wholesale business, we cannot make changes unilaterally. We're subject to price filing requirements, and that many of those have a large time window ahead of them. The reality is that the reduction of the tariffs is really going to have no impact on the pricing of imports due to the fact that our costs of doing business have increased. And in some cases, more so than the tariffs. As a wholesaler, we are funding those increases because they happen well before the goods get to the consumer. So I feel like we've spent a lot of doom and gloom today. and obviously there's areas that we can focus on, but we also need to appreciate that we are in a growing industry and we are going through pains due to the challenges of the global economy. And we need to ensure we're actively communicating this to our employees and to our customers, because the wine and spirits will be here at some point and we will be ready to get them to market. And like Allison mentioned, we need everyone to understand where we are in that process and that it's not due to a lackadaisical approach. Everyone is involved in trying to make sure that we are getting product to our warehouses and to our customers as quickly as possible. But until we can get to the point where we have goods to get to market to be able to fulfill currently the needs, we will continue to look for opportunities for new relationships, as well as foster the partnerships we have, because ultimately we need to adjust to the responsibility that we have and be thoughtful in our approach for the long term. So I think that, you know, from my perspective as a wholesaler, I look back 2 years ago and I'm like, God, it was easy. Because you could start a relationship or you could sit down and plan at the beginning of the year for your needs and you had visibility. And you had what I would say fair expectations of when you would get those goods and how you would take them to market. And right now that's somewhat out the window. And I think my big word for 2020 was nimble. If you weren't nimble as an organization, you couldn't be successful. And COVID was kind to the alcohol beverage industry, but it took a lot more than that to be successful in 2020 as an organization. And I don't know what a stronger word is than nimble, but it applies to 2021 because every day you're getting something new thrown at you that you need to react to in a different way than you did before. And all of that involves every aspect of a wholesaler because there's impacts operationally, there's impacts financially, and there's impacts from a sales standpoint. So, you know, you'd love to be able to isolate those things and say it's only one area's problem, but it impacts everyone. And so that's why to me, it's so important that we make sure that we're communicating at all times what is happening, despite the fact that it's not always a lot of fun to be the messenger.
No doubt. Dina, I think I really appreciate you providing that really holistic overview from a distributor standpoint and touching on so many different aspects, including things that we can do differently, as you say, in the doom and gloom environment. But there are things that we, in fact, can control. But I think one of the overarching questions that I'm sure is on everybody's mind, and I do want to touch base with Allison on this is, Allison, you know, from your perspective and from that global overview, is there any end in sight? What is that prognosis? And I know we touched on kind of the pricing a little bit, but maybe we should dig in a little deeper on that aspect. And, you know, how does this look 6, 12, 18, 24 months from now and even further? What is that long-term implication?
Definitely the $1 million question these days, you know, when is this going to end? It certainly is a cycle, but I will say in the shipping industry, and again, most of you don't live and breathe it, but the panorama of carriers, of providers has shrunk dramatically. So we've gone from, say, 30 ocean carriers to about 13 and just 3 alliances. So these companies are getting much better, and I'll use the word nimble here, much more nimble in terms of shrinking capacity the minute there is an overcapacity situation. So we saw this a bit, during COVID and even back, a couple of years ago as some volumes dropped, they'll pull out a vessel string or what they call layup vessels. They'll take a vessel out. So as much as I say this is a cycle and there will be an end to this massive surge, the question is, when. The expectation is at the earliest beginning of Q4. But I think more realistically, we are going to be living with this throughout 2021. And I think things will start to normalize near the end of the year. There will be consumer spending on services and travel and tourism as opposed to just goods. That is an expectation that this surge of inventory and everybody trying to get product on the shelves, that will calm down. But we aren't even in what is the normal peak season. And peak season for the consumer goods industry tends to come in late summer and early fall, pre-holiday, back to school, those type of things. So I don't predict any relief in the short term. But what I will be kind of wondering about as we do normalize and there's, the bookings become, steady, and each vessel is actually able to accommodate the amount of cargo that is booked on it, whether or not carriers will maintain the very greedy outlook that they've had and pull capacity the minute there does seem to be overcapacity and keep these rates high. That's kind of the unknown. When there were more carriers, there would always be one of them that would tumble. They would be, opportunistic and say, I'm going to drop my rates by 50% and I'm going to get all this new business. With fewer competitors, that is not as likely to happen. So we may be entering a period where the prices are just going to remain higher in shipping for a much longer time than ever before. And hopefully not at these levels. And I will say, as Dina was saying, the unpredictability, the surcharges, every day there's announcements, every day there's carriers sending out, and they're not talking $100, $200 additional. They're talking $1,000. They're talking $2,000. So these are not small increases, and there's no regulation there. I mean, it is the market forces. Nobody can tell them that they're not allowed to charge $10,000 a container. They can charge whatever they want, whatever the market will bear. So I just think we do need to be prepared for a pretty long haul of this situation. And the same thing in the US, that the terminals, as we see, aren't set up to take these massive ships. They could handle it when the ships weren't full. Now that the ships are full, you saw that picture of the terminals, it takes days to unload a ship. The vaccinations and return to full workforce of labor unions and longshoremen, that will help a little bit. So there's a lot of little things that will help ease this. Truck drivers getting back on the road, people's unemployment running out, and maybe joining the workforce and driving trucks again. So little rays of hope, but I'd say just be cautious for the next year.
Exactly. And so as we have these gaps, for lack of a better term, I want to go back to Sonia here for a moment. So Sonia, kind of based on everything I'm hearing today and really taking into consideration both domestic and import challenges in terms of transportation in all facets, obviously product availability really does start to dictate the choices that our buyers are making. So in terms of the restaurant menu or the shelf sets themselves, do you anticipate some shifts that we need to keep in mind and in the forefront of our mind as we talk to our buyers? Because at least in my mind's eye, some of this data is going to get skewed here at some point, just based sheerly on availability, not necessarily consumer demand.
No, great point, Jennifer. And I think we can a little bit speak to what Dina was mentioning, is really thinking about those lead times. So if I'm working with an on-premise operator and I want to get an Italian wine or an import on an LTO or on the menu, really think about what that placement looks like from a timing perspective and ensure that we're hitting the right time frame for that specific product if there are availability issues, so we can make sure that it is, just like you said, just make sure that it is available. Same thing from a programming perspective. Working with your retailer, if during a specific time period, we focus on a specific varietal or highlight either an import or domestic variety, again, really taking into consideration those lead times and how long it's taking for specific products to enter into the distributor for us to even get it to our accounts.
Absolutely. I think that makes a ton of sense. And then really carrying forth that message, as you stated earlier, Sonia, from an Italian perspective, from Christina's property in Italy, thinking about the consumer is still demanding these items, and based on various availability, we still need to be able to speak to what those demands were. And so oftentimes in data speak, we might not think about hearkening back to data from 2019, But Sonia, would you advise that in this instance, maybe thinking about utilizing data from previous trends as we come out of the current situation?
Yes, absolutely. I may not have been extremely clear, but we really are entering into almost a self-fulfilling prophecy to where if we look at archive data where the market dynamics are really challenging availability issues, pricing issues, and really dragging consumer behavior, we really need to make sure that we are cognizant of the different dynamics that are affecting the data so we can speak to those. I know currently a lot of the analysis that me and my team are pushing out and are really representing with a lot of our supplier partners and retailers, we are going back to 2019 because there are so many anomalies in the 2020 data. We are resetting and level setting, going back to I guess we could say pre-COVID. I think we've heard COVID like so many times over the course of this last year. I know I don't like to even say it anymore. But, really ensuring that we are speaking holistically and truly, again, really communicating what those different market dynamics are, how they affect data, and in turn, what exactly that is influencing those trends, and making sure that, a lot of our accounts, our suppliers, everybody is more intelligent these days because data is so readily available. So again, we really just have to make sure that we can speak to why those trends may be flying off the charts or really declining massively.
Excellent. I appreciate that perspective. And then Christina and Dina, I think it would be wonderful to hear kind of your perspective on, the next steps. And as we sit here kind of as a linked group in our universe of alcohol beverage, Christina and Dina, how can we better facilitate and work together to try to overcome these obstacles day in and day out from each of your perspectives?
Dina, if you want me to start, having just jumped off a call with all my sales directors, one thing we need to do is communication. We've gotten much better at communication using technology. One thing we're doing with our buyers and with our wholesalers is asking kind of in advance, what programs are you planning? What big dips or buys are you planning on? What do we hope to get? Because we used to just kind of assume and build that into our projections. And now what we're seeing is it's so hard to project and predict. So we don't want to overload inventory. We got to move it around the country. And we don't really have great trends coming out of COVID. So we have to look back. But honestly, it's a new buying pattern. So one of the things we're recommending to our team, it's more and more communication of, I think this is coming. I need it in this market. Can you share? Can you give up your market share of it? And if we do that, it's going to help us a lot better. And communicating back to our customers, as you were saying, this isn't necessarily that our company or your Mr. Wholesaler, Mrs. Wholesaler can't sell it, is that this is a global issue. Be patient with us. And if we need to push programs back, because we've been asking questions like Allison's been answering, how much time do you need? What's the worst case scenario time-wise? Okay, if we're going to launch a product, we're not going to launch it in September. We wanted to launch it July. We're not going to launch it in September. It's just too crazy. So we're going to have to hold it off for next year. So we need to make those decisions now, and we kind of plan for the worst and hope for the best, put it that way. Dina, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, so I was going to say Allison's just got to figure it out.
I wish it were that simple, Allison.
In the meantime, I'm kidding, Allison. In the meantime, no, I think everything you said, and what I would add to that is we can't make assumptions, right? So, I think in the past, like I said, we've been able to make decisions because we were conditioned to this is how it worked. This is how it went. And all of that's been thrown out the window. And I know we're talking about imports, but it applies domestically too. And so, I think that, communication is so important within our own organizations. So people have visibility. So when they're talking with their, whether that be a supplier or a retailer or a restaurateur, they're giving them the best possible information because the frustration level is just very high. And the good news is there's good things going on around us, right? Our communities are improving and we're seeing more activity. And so we have all these good things going around us. And now we have like this new blemish. So I think, again, I appreciate the new word of the year. Somebody put in the chat, agile, because you're 100% correct. It's not just about being able to bob and weave, but to be thoughtful in how you do it. So So from that standpoint, I just think that our approach has been that we can't, the norm, we love this word, right? The norm does not exist for the way we approached our business for imports in the past, and we need to adjust accordingly.
I just want to throw one quick thing out there too. Like, we've been really focusing on Europe and the difficulty there, but it isn't the same in every country. And there are countries that are less affected. And I think, we talked internally about like Chile to the US East Coast. Not that bad. Rates have not gone crazy. There's still, you can ship almost every week without a problem. So it isn't completely global. It may happen later in Chile, but there's areas that are not as impacted. So when you talk about planning and looking at your products, and you're all, global players here, there can be some supplementing from, perhaps the countries that you actually can move products. So that's another thing where, it isn't completely universal. Mexico's another area. Yeah, it's maybe congested on the border, but tequila is going crazy, and you can still move the tequila pretty well, whether it's ocean or truck. So it's just interesting in terms of looking at the various lanes and then trying to juggle that, like you said, because it could change by the week, but trying to find the new normal is not easy. But there are pockets that are actually working pretty well.
Excellent. And then just one last question. I'll open it up to the panel at large here in terms of, obviously, we're in a relationship business and we pride ourselves on that. So, what advice do we have, or what can we share with everyone viewing today in terms of how to continue to strengthen our collective partnerships, as well as those with our customers, and just the industry as a whole? So for anybody, it's a jump ball if you want to kind of jump in, and we can wrap it up with that question from there.
I think you just try to get together and open a bottle of wine together whenever possible with whomever, and you'll make friends in our industry. So what I like to think of, this is long-term. Our industry is long-term. Everyone in on this panel has been in business, or their families or their relatives or their companies, a long time. So it is a long-term build. Be patient. We had to go through a lot of change. We're going through a lot of change. Don't rush into it. If you're in the wine and spirits business, you're here because you love it and you want to be in it. So take your time, breathe. There's going to be lots of opportunities, drink some good wine, and just keep being out there building relationships. And thanks to WSWA for helping do this as well, bringing us together. Give it to somebody else.
Yeah, I was going to bring up just the communication piece that we were just speaking about. I think communicating at all levels of leadership and all tiers within the industry. I know that we've built up a website that is industry facing, that our communication from a data perspective has really helped exponentially a lot of our suppliers and retailers, sharing data, sharing the insights that Allison, Dina, and Christina, you all shared today. I think that will be top notch to really help bring us together and really help form those relationships even more.
No doubt. So net is we're all in this together. So with that, Dina, if you want to do the honors today, certainly appreciate the opportunity to spend time with each of these panel experts. I just can't say enough great things about them. And of course, how appreciative I am to be here today with all of you as well.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. I don't know, Jen, if there's any questions, if anybody has any questions. I don't see any in the chat. Okay.
We're good, Dina. All questions were answered.
Oh, okay, great. All right. So with that said, first, I want to thank Jen for her leadership today, and also the WSWA team for allowing us this platform. It was a lot of fun, and I enjoyed getting together with everyone. We'd like to obviously thank our leadership development gold level sponsors, JP Morgan and 365 Wine Trade, and to our silver sponsors, Wine and Spirit Shippers Association, Albatrans, and Mintel. And to all the WSWA members in attendance today, and to those of you who may be watching this after the fact recorded, we think of you too, and we thank you for your attention. We hope you found this webinar insightful and you have a few actionable takeaways. And thank you again for the great suggestion on the new word, agile. WSWA will continue to host a series of webinars in addition to the Women's Leadership Development webinars throughout the year on topics to be discussed with experts from various sectors of business and government. So stay tuned, make sure you attend. As always, you can access resources on the WSWA website at wswa.org. Thank you again for attending. Be safe, be well.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
you.
all.
Thanks.
Stay